The idea of a Miraculous Ladybug Japanese anime may seem weird to some casual fans, but it's come close to happening a few times now. Miraculous Ladybug is known for its 3D animated style and recent switch to an even more advanced 3D engine. But originally, it was produced to be a 2D cartoon with the help of the Japanese studio Toei Animation as a sort of proof of concept short. This was later made available on the Japanese Blu-rays of Miraculous Ladybug as a bonus feature, allowing fans insight into what this show may have been originally. While I imagine some channels have discussed this a bit already, there's actually some really interesting lore behind the Kwami-type character named Null who was going to appear in the series, so try to stick around to the end. Now, before being made in 3D, we got this anime preview video that showed the ideas of the series in its basic form, the adventures of Ladybug and Cat Noir. The show still took place in Paris, wanting to be an international show, and still starred Marinette as Ladybug. But for Cat Noir, his character was originally named Felix. Yes, the same Felix that is Adrien's twin cousin in the actual show. Originally, Cat Noir's character was imagined as almost more antagonistic in his personal life. While Adrien didn't have feelings for Marinette early on in the actual show, he wasn't dismissive of her either. In the Ladybug anime, however, Marinette was supposed to have strong love feelings for Felix, but Felix was supposed to treat her not just dismissively, but rather arrogantly so. We can see in the animation that Marinette seems to follow him around and stare at him with goo-goo eyes, and he tends to act rather rude. We don't know what they're saying, but he's obviously telling her to leave him alone in some way. It was such a bad look that the creators had to rethink the entire dynamic, as it just didn't make sense why Marinette would love Felix so much if he's generally just a bad person, especially to her in particular. The basis for Felix's character would be recycled into the show, where he got to come in basically as Adrien's clone, despite Adrien really being originally a clone of Felix. Apparently, Felix also felt rather generic as a magical girl love interest, with his dynamic feeling a bit like Mamoru or Tuxedo Mask from Sailor Moon, who would just outright bully Sailor Moon in her civilian form while being in love with her as a superhero. The show is well known for its themes of yin and yang, and this was likely the inspiration for the idea of Felix being a bit antagonistic. Yin and yang are destruction and creation, black and white, dark and light. Two ideas that are always seen as opposites, but are really just opposite extremes of the same thing. In the civilian form, Marinette was going to be a lovey-dovey girl just following Felix around, her love representing creation. Felix thus had to be dismissive or even mean to balance that out, trying to destroy Marinette's feelings. When Marinette turns to Ladybug, however, she would go through a bit of an inner transformation and become a lot more aggressive in battle. Felix seems to find this more attractive than Marinette's lovey-dovey approach, and thus as Cat Noir falls in love with Ladybug. Originally, it would seem Cat Noir's powers were not about cataclysms of destruction, but more so bad luck, being able to use this to disrupt his enemies' attacks according to the early art book. We see this idea reflected in the animation, where unlike Marinette, who becomes more perfectly poised as Ladybug, Felix seems to become less poised as Cat Noir, looking more like a cat desperately jumping around trying to make sure it lands on its feet, though he always seems to. This is a sharp contrast to his civilian form, where he has perfect poise because of his formal attitude. When Felix would be reimagined as Adrien, this same pattern would be applied to Adrien's personal life. Instead of wanting to be formal, Adrien wants to be a free cat running around town and having fun. But his dad has him very strictly scheduled with work and lessons. Even just going to school felt more like freedom because he'd at least be able to interact with other kids in his spare moments. When he transforms, he gets to escape that order that surrounds him and be the destructive wild kid that is Cat Noir. Adrien's dynamic is symbolized in his clothes, where he is a black shirt surrounded by a white overshirt. You'll notice this resembles the yin-yang wheel, which has a black dot surrounded by a white light. Here, Adrien is that black dot of destruction, surrounded by the order created by his father. Marinette's outfit is the inverse of this, with her having a white shirt and a black overshirt, the white, or order, surrounded by the chaos that is her life. This was echoed out in the original, with Marinette having a nearly identical outfit with the same color scheme, but Felix's was a bit different. He has a black vest surrounded by a lighter colored undershirt, but it's not pure white, instead being gray, giving a very similar feeling but emphasizing how much darker Felix was than Marinette. Meanwhile, Marinette embodied this color scheme in a different way from the 3D series in the original pilot. She is creation surrounded by destruction, and even in the original anime, that destruction was symbolized by bad luck due to plague, being an unlucky black cat. We see him knocking over books on a shelf, much to the annoyance of Felix it would seem, and it's probable that it was Felix's car that splashed Marinette as it drove by. The original anime definitely had an interesting dynamic planned, not too different from what we got, but still different enough that I do kinda wish we got to see how it panned out. But when it comes to the villain, things get wildly different and honestly a lot more intriguing. In the original anime, Gabriel Agrest's character was known as Richard Sphinx, or in his villain form, Papillion. This is due to the butterfly imagery that still would have been very strong with him and the organization he worked for. However, instead of having the Kwami of the butterfly Nuru, Richard Sphinx was going to be guided by an entity known as Null, which means nothingness. This character was not a Kwami in the way we imagine today, or even at the time of the anime, as Null wasn't trapped in some sort of miraculous, it seems. And in fact, two of Richard Sphinx's most frequent allies would have their own Kwami instead, Mr. Pigeon and Mr. Mimic. Null is more of a cosmic figure, depicted sometimes as completely dark and other times as completely light in the original artwork, perhaps more so reflecting their surrounding, which can be important if that includes the people they're talking to. Nothingness is a bit of a dark concept in the way it would have worked in the anime, as the show was about how Null is trying to bring the world back to the state before the Big Bang, ending all of creation and bringing it back to a state of nothingness. Like Gabriel Agrest, Richard is grieving a lost wife, and he may be wanting to actually end the world, but he seems more so interested in attaining wealth and dominating the world instead of destroying it. Instead, Null I imagine to be a figure that is purposely leading Richard Sphinx and other people like him with their goals towards his own bigger goal of the complete return to nothing. The Kwami in many ways can be seen as fallen gods or fallen angels, divine beings that embody great concepts of power that are now trapped on a human plane. And while in the show we got all of the miraculous seem to want to help the humans, real-life mythology has lots of stories about these darker divine figures turning against the natural order and even trying to bring about the end of all things, often posing as a god like the other angels, or in this case Kwami, in order to get people on their side. From here, they mislead people by helping them get what they want, only for it to bring about the eventual destruction of all things, even what's important to that person. This doesn't have to be evil, however, as the greater mythological tradition also talks about the destruction of all things being necessary for new beginnings to happen. This is why Miraculous Ladybug is about yin and yang, creation and destruction, as they are seen as two sides of the same thing. With that in mind, Null may not necessarily be evil, but as the embodiment of nothingness, this may be the only thing they know how to do. And the desire to return the world to nothingness can look dark when talking to someone like Papillion perhaps, but perhaps look light when talking to someone like Ladybug. Whether a hero like Ladybug or a villain like Papillion, Null would likely be able to guide them towards becoming what they think is their greatest self, only to bring about their ultimate doom because of his plans for the end of everything. In the Miraculous Ladybug comics, we learn that the Kwami each come into existence when their concept or emotion is born in some way. Because of this, it is said that the first Kwami ever was Tiki, as she came into existence after the very first act of creation ever happened. Other Kwami like Plag would follow not long after, and they would interact in the cosmic realm until about 5,000 years ago, when the miraculous were made to channel their essence into the physical world. If the original story had continued with Null, however, I like to think that Null would have actually been the first Kwami or spirit to be created. In the miraculous canon, creation itself is the first thing to happen, but if nothingness existed before the first creation, then that means Null would have come into creation first. It would be the creation of Null that is actually the first active creation, the first time something came out of nothingness, and thus it is the creation of Null that could have led to the creation of Tiki, with Tiki then being responsible for the acts and sparks of creation that lead to the actual universe replacing nothingness. This is also an important idea mythologically, where certain philosophies talk about a primordial god of non-existence that wants to bring things back to that state. For those familiar with Adventure Time, this is a huge part of its lore too, with characters like the Lich who want to bring the world back to nothingness in order to serve the god of nothingness, Gulb. So that should tell you just how common this idea is. Ultimately, I'm really glad with the show we got. I had a hard time appreciating the early seasons my first time around, but I fell in love with its use of formula and recycling to tell a greater story about the balance it takes to help us grow. The original anime idea is definitely interesting, but I want the version we have exactly as it is, right down to the jump in style after season 5. That being said, there was apparently going to be a Ladybug OVA later on when the idea of this anime preview pilot became popular, but unfortunately that seems to be shelved as well. I'd still love to see this happen and maybe make it more like the original instead of just making it an anime version of the show we got, allowing us to explore one of the many alternate realities we know exist thanks to the Paris special. But what do you guys think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and if you haven't seen it yet, check out the big 36-minute video we made on Miraculous Ladybug, where we go really deep on how yin and yang affects the show. Or come talk with us down in the Cartoon Universe Discord server about Miraculous Ladybug, where I never shut up about how much I love the show. See you guys there.